just such good value to anybody that watches it that it's worth doing it. Mm. So tell me, how have you been
Um,
since I
I,
last saw you?
I think everything.
That's a good answer.
I've been everything, all over the place.
So the more important question is then, how have you related to that? What have you had judgments about that?
Briefly, like not like it has been in the past, where that's where I live. But
Could you say that when you do have a judgment that you become aware that you're having a judgment?
eventually, yeah,
Mm.
it's not immediate because they're so familiar and that's so much my identity, and that's where I lived for so many years. It's the familiarity, I think, and it's
Yeah.
now it's where I'm heading is I've never been before. But just even to be able to say that, I feel like it's
Yes, that's important to acknowledge.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, so did you get the laughing exercise? Did I talk to you about that?
No.
Right. Well, it's really simple. What it consists of is when you do realize that you were lost in any kind of thought story, right? When you're feeling unpleasant emotions will be the trigger. When you realize that you've judged what's happened to you, what you do is you celebrate the recognition of that. The fact that you recognize that you had been lost. You celebrate that moment, you celebrate that fact, the recognition. And what will happen is, regardless of when, I mean, if you recognize that you were lost yesterday, it's likely that you're well past it, that it's gone, and say whatever. So it's just a recognition. That's fine. But what you do is you celebrate that recognition by laughing. And you laugh out loud if you can. If you can't, just laugh inwardly, smile inwardly, whatever. What happens is that when you do that, you change the hormones in the body. You go from stress hormones to feel good hormones. And so and what that does is that sets up a trigger for recognizing that you're lost, and it will start to happen sooner and sooner. And so eventually you'll be in the middle of being lost in a story and the thought will pop up, ah, you're in that story.
Hmm.
And you laugh
I think
because
that
you,
happens. Um, it happens sometimes anyway because it's
it
actually
does. Yeah.
hilarious. All the serious stuff that
Yeah.
it's really quite ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah, well, part of what happens is that what humour is a sudden switch, a
Yeah.
sudden switch of direction of where your focus is, and when you suddenly realise that you were lost in this ridiculous story, you can't help but laugh because it's crazy, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
It's like having
but
your head in the sand and then taking your head out.
yes, exactly. And the moment the thought turns up to take your head out, that's what you celebrate.
Yeah.
That recognition.
Yeah.
And what that does is it actually, it's especially when you start to have those recognizing moments in the middle of being lost, the moment you realize it, it stops by itself. You don't have to do anything. The fact that the thought turns up that says, oh, you're lost, means that you've jumped outside of the thought. You're no longer expressing the content of that story, but you're outside of it, recognizing that it's happening. And that
Hmm.
changes everything. All of a sudden, you're not lost in the story anymore, right? And as you get better and you keep practicing this, it only takes a few weeks, and in the end, you'll find that you're recognizing that you're about to get lost in something. And then you recognize it, it's just habit. It's just
Yeah.
old remnants of the way we used to do it for so many years, so long, so often, that it's just a habitual response to things and that it's no longer appropriate. And by that recognition thing, you actually create pathways on the other side of your brain, in the right side of your brain, because at that point there is no any longer, there's no judgment about it.
Yeah.
It actually has a biological effect. Um, yeah. Have you experienced the thought or had a response that when shit turns up, it's a good thing. It's an opportunity for you to dig out something else that's been buried there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the way I think about it nowadays.
Yeah, great, great. That's a big one. Yeah. So all of a sudden, these moments are not our enemy, but they're our ally. They're on our side, helping us find out more about what goes on. And it's amazing how much of that is just habitual stuff. So tell me about some of the good moments. You're having transcendent experiences.
They're kind of hard to describe because it's like there's no words for whatever. It's living outside language in a way.
Mm, excellent. Yeah. So if a stranger or somebody that you don't know particularly well says, "How are you going?" What's your response to that?
Um, I would say that I'm going really well because it's lighter, it's more transparent or thinner. Um, it lasts longer. All those things, all those. Not that I wouldn't say any of that because people don't really want to know. But for me, that's what I'm saying. I'm going really well because there's no past anymore, or I'm not looking for something. While I also recognize there's still self-criticism, it's not like a heavy kind of, I believe it, way of it turning up, but more, oh yeah, that's that old, you know,
Yep.
story that
Yep.
go that old wheel turning. So
Right.
it's got
So
less.
if, I asked you, what if a stranger asked you that? How you going? What would you respond with?
Just that I'm going really well.
Right. And then all those other thoughts about that would be
It's
there.
fine. Yeah,
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
because I know that social norms, like we're all in a busy hurry, don't really care, don't want to spend much, like I say this as a social, you know, something you just throw out, you
Mm,
know,
mm,
what we all do, but it's okay too. That's all fine. It
yeah.
doesn't. matter. I don't need someone to understand me anymore.
Yeah, good one. Good.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
I used to want to be understood so desperately, but I don't think anyone could.
That's right. That's good. Yeah, that's what I say. Why would you want what's impossible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like asking someone else to be responsible for me, which is like, I may as well, say I'm the moon.
Mm, yeah. It's crazy stuff.
But I wanted that so much for so long.
So what's your response now that you've got it?
That everyone is here, wherever it is that this is. I don't know what this is, but that everyone is this, and it is that slow unwinding of all those stories and all that stuff that our conditioning or our world seems to hold as reality. It's just a slow unwinding of that.
So if you're more accurate, would you just say a slow unwinding of your belief in that, or a slow unwinding of your behaving as if that's still actual? How
All
would
of it.
you describe it more accurately than when you say slow unwinding?
In comparison. So before I used to be in a hurry. It was like I want it now. Whatever I didn't even know what it was that I wanted, but I had to have it now because now is a good time to have it. I didn't want to wait. But actually now that I'm having had waited reluctantly, now I look back and think, okay, I can see I was in a process. It was just a process because it is a slow unwinding. And if I had done what myself demanded, which was now, I have it now, I would have gone crazy. So that's like the thing had to happen the way it ever happened so that I could be amalgamated in a sane way to act sanely.
Yeah, yeah,
And I have to say also, it's just like it's so bizarre. Nothing has changed and everything has changed.
mm. So can you see that change comes from just using a different perspective?
I think I expanded somehow. It's like I had a very narrow, tight view of everything, or an unconscious view, or something, something that was tight.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. Yeah,
And now it seems like I'm holding everything loosely while everything just, comes and goes. The
yeah,
personality
yeah,
and
yeah,
life does its thing, and I attach to it, or I detach, or I look, or I don't, or whatever. It's just like it's all fine. Or I'm,
yeah,
going, oh God, here I go again. The same, 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 and then and it's all fine. I couldn't have said that before. It wasn't fine. It was seriously wrong. And I wanted it to change, and I wanted to be different, and all that.
yeah,
And And now I understand, of course, that's why they say that's the suffering, you know. But it's like that thing for me, it's like words of wisdom, like everyone's so wise, and you listen to people on YouTube and your beautiful self and traditions and everything. And it made absolutely no sense. It was like, ping pong balls being fired at me, and I had my bat, just busy
yeah,
batting them out of the way. They made no impact at all. I just thought, oh, there's something wrong with me. I don't understand this. And it's as if we each have our own way of finding And that's what the feeling of I can't, because I used to try and talk about all this. I don't even know what all this is, but try and talk about it. And of course, people can't hear it until they can hear it.
Mm,
There's no way in
yep.
at all.
So is it really clear to you that everything that you ever went through had to
Is
happen exactly the way it did for you to be
Yeah,
here now, like this?
perfect.
Yeah, yeah, that's a big one, isn't it? Like even I once had the thought of, oh, I wished I'd have woken up when I was still a teenager. It would have been a whole different life. And then I went, hang on, that's crazy. What I went through to get here had to be exactly what it was. I was a slow learner, and it took me, all my life. It took me 65 years to get here.
Yeah,
And
I'm grateful. I'm a slow burner now.
mm,
I think it's that I had to heal a lot of, I don't know what it actually went on, but just healing all that is the same time as moving forward, becoming more and more conscious in this way of, looking at all that healing that had to happen. And I can't even talk about that either because I don't know what happened, but something changed there too.
mm,
It all just feels like it was just meant to be. And it wasn't up to, it's not anything to do with me. It's like I think I had my hands tightly on the steering wheel, and I was, that little cartoon. I remember seeing Goofy, Disney World's Goofy, driving until he was slathering with saliva and rage, and I was like that about everything. And now it's like I could whistle if I could whistle, like Goofy. Sit back
mm,
in my seat and just watch. I know my hands aren't even on the steering wheel. Sometimes they are. I'm still have that twitch of, control. But it's a twitch now. It's not where I live most of the time.
it's not what?
Where I am most of the time, where I live.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that. I don't have to, for safety and security, big, big things for me to be safe and to feel loved and all that. And I just see it as, yeah, actually what I wanted from all that was, I, it was impossible. It's actually impossible.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy those expectations we had, isn't it?
It's impossible.
Yeah.
Yes. So I could see that at Christmas. Christmas Day is wonderful. Family. And just seeing what I wanted from them, there's no way that was even possible.
Yeah. Yeah, family's good like that, isn't it? They can,
Yeah.
they can certainly trigger things.
Yeah.
Mm.
Which is great.
Yeah, it is. Very humbling.
This is life. Life is very humbling.
Yes, it is. When I was a kid, I used to have these, I guess, a weird self-induced psychedelic experience where I would sit on the floor in the kitchen and I would contemplate how an atom would be in the leg of the table of the leg of the kitchen table. And so there's a single atom in that leg, and then I would imagine that the formation of that atom, that our whole universe was one atom in the in a cell in
Mm,
the right big toe of a giant, and that our whole universe was just one atom in that,
mm,
and that then when you zoom out to that level, that was in fact one atom in something else, and so you could get this absolutely huge thing in 2 steps really quickly, and the
mm.
other way around as well. That I could go smaller, so I could go in that atom was other atoms. I don't know how I did it as a kid, but it was like everything was made up of atoms. It was probably the discovery of what an atom was at that age that just had me fascinated, and how it was reproduced in the solar system and reproduced in the galaxy as well, and right down always that infinitely smaller and infinitely larger. And my mind trying to keep up with that would just induce a weird sensation in me that I loved. I
Yeah.
loved doing it. Yeah. Mm. And it's like that. And when with that little story, and you evoked that when you were talking about our non separation, that it was like that's the way we are. If we're just an atom in some larger structure, then how humbling is that? That's just amazing. Here we are with our whole world and everything involved in that world, and we're just one atom. The whole world and everybody in it is just riding out on one atom. How amazingly complex is everything when you zoom out. No matter how far you zoom out, you just get a repeat of that pattern, and then how far you zoom in, same thing again, infinitely smaller. But in that was this feeling of non-separation. Everything was there was no like there were no parts. Because an atom is something so fundamental that everything's built on that. It wasn't like you could take an atom out and it would change anything. If you lost a single atom, it wouldn't matter. Everything would still go on and look the same.
Mm,
But a great appreciation
mm.
of the oneness of everything. Everything just not
Everything,
made up of parts. A
everything
hologram.
as it's meant to be,
Yeah.
and everything necessary. Everything is necessary.
Yeah, I have a bit of trouble with the meant to be thing. I know what you mean, and I agree with that. Everything is as it should be. I also agree with that, but have trouble with that too,
Mm,
because it's not like there's no meant and there's no should. They're just made up things by different societies. But at the same time, I get what you mean. That everything is operating as it is, kind of thing, and that it is perfect
mm.
in the way that it finds its own balance all the time.
My neighbors,
Mm. They seem close.
yeah, yeah, they are very sad. But just shut the doors. I'll just go
Mm.
and do that. Thank you, Vincent.
Hi.
Hi. How are you, Bianca?
Good. Hoping that are working in full, which I know because I want to eat all the time. That's the side effect. And when the thought comes that uh, I don't know anything about what I am doing, there is not even a pang of anxiety and fear. It's just a thought.
So is it a nothing kind of response, no response at all, or is there something? Does something get triggered? Some kind of response get triggers? Is there a feeling that it's okay that you don't know anything? Not a feeling of loss.
Maybe maybe there is some kind of judgment, that it's not a useful thought. I mean, it's not worth spending time
Mm,
on.
that's the thought that you know nothing.
Yes, because maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but what does it change, really?
Hmm.
The fact is, I have a work to be done, and I have to do it, whatever.
Yeah. So why even consider it? Yeah.
Hmm.
You just do it because it's there to be done. Yeah. But there is something that, well, that I've said on a few occasions, that recognition that I know nothing contains elements of freedom for me, um, and it's kind of, it's subtle and complex, but the freedom is in, not in that I know nothing, but in that I don't need to know anything. So there's not, I'm no longer compelled to be a repository of information in case I need it. So in that sense, there's a freedom that comes. So it's
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, it is great that I can go back to my work, and
yes,
I have this freedom not to spend time on this thought, not struggle with my emotional reaction to this thought.
mm, yeah. So it's like it gives you permission to just do what needs to be done, to be as
Mm.
whatever, and we don't need to waste our effort in some imaginary conflict that gets us nowhere
Yeah.
anyway. There is no actual resolution to it. Yeah.
I was talking with Ramisi about how this is how meds work for me, and he asked, does the meds make you awake?
What do you think he was saying? Was he making a statement with that question?
Maybe that he imagines being awakened like this. not spending your energy and time on this reactions or these emotions that lead nowhere.
Yeah. So that's a big one. That's a big one for him in particular, because he does seem somewhat confused, not consumed by everything that's going on sometimes. But we shouldn't talk about him when he's not here.
Yeah.
But it's a big thing what you say if that expands out into, well, almost your whole universe, if you like, then it's amazing the realization of how much energy and time and everything that we used to spend speculating about useless, absolutely, totally useless stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, I know I only can do this with this scratch of maths. So it's also like I started thinking that maybe I'm it's just that my nervous system is too weak for awakening. No, it's like when there is a small stress and it all goes haywire.
Mm. It's interesting to consider that one. If in the way that things used to be, in the way that is very common in our society, we are constantly operating at 95% capacity all the time, and a huge amount of that is contemplating, arguing, discussing, whatever, totally useless stuff we can't change, stuff that we think should be different, but it can't be because it's not in our control to do anything with it. Right? So there's that huge amount of energy. I think I read somewhere once that 80% of the energy that a human being consumes in a day gets consumed in the brain. 80% of the energy happens with brain work. And yet our brain is so efficient that it operates on just a few watts of energy. If we were to build a computer to do what our brain did even today, it would take a powerhouse to run it. And yet, ours does it. But still it consumes most of our energy. I don't know that works for me that well, but anyway, that's what I read. And the realization that probably 95% of that energy is used up in thought stories. Thoughts, having stories and then responding to them, having stories and then responding to them. So would you not imagine that that takes a lot more energy, that your nervous system needs to be much more malleable to cope with that situation than it would to cope with the situation where you're awake and relaxed about things?
Yes, of course. This is why I take meds, not to use so much energy on useless emotional reaction. It's physically exhausting.
Mm. Mm. How are you going, Marius? How are you feeling about the guiding? Are you being relaxed about that?
Yeah, I'm pretty relaxed about it. I mean, there was some thoughts about how to go about it, like a kind of a mm, approach, and then I just threw that away and let it happen. Whatever comes up.
When I read the threads, my thoughts were that well, you've done a bit of work on all of the files in there. You're working through this quite methodically, and you certainly look like you know what you're doing.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, yeah. I That's where I started out. I started out by trying to kind of figure out a smart approach, but it just feels inauthentic. So that start is fine, and then now I'm just gonna meet them where they are, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Trust your intuition. That's your best guide.
yeah,
Yeah. If your intuition says something, go with it.
yeah. Other than that, it's exciting. I
Hmm.
like I like talking about this stuff. So
Yeah, it's good.
yeah,
Yeah. If you yeah, we're friends on Facebook, aren't we?
yeah.
Um, there was a group that was going for a while that I was having Zoom meetings about with guide training, and there's a few videos over there of those meetings. Um, so I'll invite you to join that group. It's kind of a bit defunct now because we stopped doing it because no guides were turning up to it. Only
Okay,
seasoned guides would come, um, but there'd still be a few things worth listening to in that. The discussion between guides about what comes up from time to time. So yeah, I'll invite you to join that group,
yeah. I appreciate that.
and you've got access to the videos then. Yeah.
Why do you think nobody turned up?
I don't know. I don't know. It triggered me a bit, thinking that we were doing something useless. That yeah, I just presumed that. Well, I mean, I remember from when I was guiding on Liberation Unleashed, doing a couple at a time. It was extremely busy. A lot went on with that guiding, and I could imagine that guides easily feel overwhelmed, especially when they start working with more than one person. Um, and I know I used to get to that stage of feeling overwhelmed as well, because I would read the thread when they turned up, but I generally wouldn't respond until that night. So when I went to bed, I would respond to the threads that I was working on. And I got to the point where I'd go to bed at midnight and I'd still be responding to somebody at 3 a.m. It was just too much to do every single night.
Yeah.
So maybe that was why people didn't come. I don't know.
Can't really know.
No, well, see, because in Liberation Unleashed, there's not really much interaction between guides. And I thought that what a great opportunity to give them an opportunity to get together on Zoom and actually discuss in real time, various issues that come up when they're doing guiding or even just the experiences that they've had when they're guiding that will help somebody else, especially new guides. But it didn't seem to be something that was wanted. Or who knows? Maybe it was just the time it was happening, the time of day was wrong or the day of the week was wrong or I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah.
Anyway, I decided I'd prefer to sleep in than get up and do it.
Yeah, I get that. How many meetings do you have now? Do you still have that Feder meeting as well,
Yes, yeah, yeah.
in
So
addition to these?
do three of these a week, and then the federal one as well, and then a few one-to-ones as well.
Yeah, full-time job sounds like.
It's pretty busy. Yeah. It's still more like play than work, though.
Yeah,
The same with these meetings. I mean, Bianca's been a really solid attender. Um, Irene frequently comes, but I mean, once upon a time there'd be 30 people here today. Now there's just us.
yeah,
And I can be pretty sure it's not because of my body odor or bad breath. Who knows? Yeah.
yeah. But I've been meaning, since you brought it up, has been a couple of times when I've watched the recordings back where I just got filled with so much love and appreciation for what you're doing here. And I thought, like, okay, I don't want to send Vince a message saying this. I want to say it over video and express it. But yeah, it's really beautiful that you're still doing this. And um,
It still fills me with great
yeah,
pleasure and if, if feeling good can be so good that it almost hurts, it's like that sometimes. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I think I'm pretty sure a lot of people feel the same way, even though they're not turning up
Yeah,
every
I,
time.
I, I think so too. I get that. Yeah. And over the
Vince?
years, sorry,
Oh, no, continue.
I was just going to say over the years since I've been doing this, the list of people that I collected, people kept saying, could you add me to the list so they got notified and got the links for the whatever. That grew to over 230 people. And since I've been doing it on Substack, quite a few have cancelled that. When I say quite a few, a dozen or so have probably have cancelled that. Um, because I guess it's an email that they don't need to get if they're not looking at it. But the rest
Or
still are, yeah.
yeah, I was just gonna say, or they just don't need the email and get the notification on YouTube, like
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. Could be doubling up, yeah.
because you have like I don't know 370 subscribers on YouTube.
Oh,
So that
really? Wow,
yeah,
I didn't see that one. Yeah. So I get fairly consistent feedback from different people about, getting something out of it. So that gives me great hope that it is doing good in the world.
Yeah, for sure.
So what would you say, Marius, as a new guide, but somebody with the perspective of wisdom and everything, what does Bianca need to fully wake up? Can we find out? Can you ask her?
Well, I would just direct that question directly to her.
Well, go on.
So, Bianca, why aren't you awake?
You presume she's not with that question. It means, why do
Because
you
it
think you're
started.
not awake? Or maybe you do.
Yeah, right now I think because I need the scratch of medicine and my nervous system is just weak. And my mind is stopping the awakening because it would be too much.
Too much how? What do you expect would happen to your nervous
Some
system if you woke
things
up?
can come up, things that are buried, kept safely, locked.
You mean,
That I have no idea about.
so there's an assumption there that there actually is something locked up, but you also say you actually don't have any idea what or if there is, right? How if how if that is just a thought and a heavy, heavy burden that you're putting on yourself?
It doesn't feel like a heavy burden.
Why do you come to these meetings?
Who knows?
Have you ever thought about it?
There may be quite mundane reason that I need company.
Sense of community?
Yes.
What do you call those mundane?
Hmm.
They seem pretty important to me.
Yes, but they are still mundane. You know, it's like it wouldn't be different if it's about awakening or about collecting stamps. Or it's because there was always this existential anxiety. Why does it exist at all? Why is there a consciousness, an experience?
Why do you need to know that?
Because there is anxiety about it.
Where do you think that anxiety comes from?
It is a reaction, emotional reaction to the thought of this, that there is something rather than nothing.
So it's a reaction to thought.
Yes,
And if you are you able to turn away from that thought when it pops up?
am I able? I think I am able, but I don't want to.
Mm. And why is that?
It seems right not to turn away.
That sounds pretty heavy to me.
It is how it is.
Yeah. So you have it sounds to me in like you have an attachment to this thought. And I'm curious as to why that attachment is there. Do you have any ideas about that? Other than that it just feels right?
Hmm. No, I just like it.
Would it be fair to say that you would prefer to keep that attachment more than you would prefer to wake up?
I don't know.
Because
I
that's
honestly don't know.
they don't really gel together. How do you think it would feel to let it go?
The word that comes up is soulless.
Mm.
Did I hear you right? Did you say soulless? Right.
Does that have any connection? Does it sound right that it also connects to some kind of purpose? Or is that doesn't fit? No.
I find it interesting that you have one of the characteristics of being awake quite clearly when you respond to something with, well, that's just it. That just is. It just is the way it is. You say that fairly frequently. That's definitely a characteristic of an awake person. One of them. So, do you think it's possible that we can be awake in one area but not in another? I mean, it's very subtle stuff, but you kind of imagine that being awake means that a lot of different areas are connected at some point. So when Marius mentioned about you having an attachment, you nodded like you recognize that you do have an attachment to that. How do you experience that attachment? Does it have a certain feeling for you? Or in what, how do you know you've got an attachment?
Well, I guess it is in this word soulless that, without it, I would feel a robot-like,
Mm,
just doing my job, earning money.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
What I find really interesting about that is that those I know that are awake are soulful people, not soulless. Look at Mario. He would cry at the Marius here. He would cry at the drop of a hat with something, wonderful comes into his life. He's so full of soul and all variations of that. Yet I get where you're coming from. I get this idea that people have that to be awake means non-responsive, robot-like, zombie even like, which is the opposite direction to my experience. When without social inhibitions, I'm much more likely to express stuff that's not socially acceptable than otherwise. It
But
certainly
no,
happens.
no, no, no. Somehow it is different. I'm not talking emotionless.
Okay. Okay. Now, soulless is different. Yes.
Like, I remember my teenage years. Yeah, where there were parties and all the drama and it's full of emotion, but it was also so flat.
And was that flatness? Did that somehow have something to do? My story that comes up here is that because it's meaningless. Is that why was it flat? What was the flatness about? It was devoid of something to be flat, wasn't it? What was it devoid of? That soul?
Well, yes, it's depth.
Depth, yeah. Yeah.
What I what comes up here that I would like to share is that after the shift happened here, um, there's so much richness and depth in simplicity. So outside of the mind, outside of those ideas of why we exist and all of these bigger questions. So could you entertain that if
Well,
if you
that
were
is
to let go of that attachment, I mean?
it's hard to tell because that is a depth that I can't imagine. I have no idea what are we talking about. So how can I compare? I can't.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of something missing around that?
Well, if you would ask me, I would say that for sure I am not awakened. So the there must be something missing if I have
Yep. Yeah.
this strong conviction.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
is there any curiosity as like around what I just shared? Like, is there any is there any movement towards wanting to get to know what I'm speaking about?
Hmm. Oh, no. There is none of this. I want to know this depth that Marius is speaking about. It's just not my experience.
Hmm. Is there any seeking at all? Ex like, do you do anything um other than these meetings to kind of awaken?
She goes to Buddhist Sangha, has Sangha with a Buddhist group. I don't
Is
know if
that
that
Yeah.
answers your question, though. I'm jumping in. Is that for that purpose? The purpose of moving in a certain direction?
With my sangha, it's the same like with these meetings.
community?
Yes, community and yes, and this topic of awakening.
Are you saying there's something attractive about this topic?
That I had some experiences that make me feel like I can relate.
Do you do you still believe that there is a separate self? That there's a Bianca in there?
Calling it a belief is it's rather like a sense. There is a sense of self, but is there a self? A sense is just a sense.
So the feeling that you're here, is that, am I hearing you correct?
Yeah.
Mm.
So
So that
there's two things,
But
like an awake person.
but on the other hand, it's like the, the self is just here, and there exists nothing else than this here. So like there is only here and no there. I mean, there are stories about there, but yeah, other than in stories, there is no where.
that sounds pretty awake to me.
Hmm. So how do things happen, Bianca? What's behind you just taking a sip out of that cup? Was that you controlling things, or did that just happen?
It happens.
Hmm. That's three things. We can keep going here. Yeah. What are you
Are
responsible for? Sorry, Maurice.
No, I was gonna say, are those things, are you answering from a intellectual level or are you experiencing that?
Oh, who knows?
No, but have you really looked at, like, closely looked at what you do in a certain day and um, confirmed for yourself that the actions that you do is not done by anyone? or is it a belief or something you've learned?
To be honest, I'm not sure.
I appreciate that honesty. Would you be up for?
I can see how my decisions are conditioned, but I don't think I can trace every decision that I make throughout the day, or every word I say here. Or
But if I were to challenge you to find one, only one decision or action within a whole day, would you be up for that challenge?
trace one decision.
If you can trace or find one decision within a day that you make that is done by someone with control, could would you be willing to explore that?
I'm just looking about on the day that have passed, and I can see not one.
I invite you to keep doing that for a while until
Yes,
you are convinced experientially.
but do you know, when I was meditating, I was also looking at that, how thoughts appear, how I repeat instructions, don't engage with the thoughts, but don't resist them either. To keep it like a horse tied to a pole, not too tight, not too loose. Just anchoring, come back to the breath, come back to the breath gently. And all of this was just happening. It was
Perfect.
not me making decision. I come to it's just, and you know, I had a discussion in the sangha with a guy, but funny guy. and was meditating for 19 years, which we heard very often from him. And he was convinced that there is free will. And I was so bamboozled. How can you meditate for 19 years and not see but there is no one making decisions? So what are you doing in meditation?
Yeah, there's as many different forms of meditating as there are people who do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just about believing a thought at the end of the day. There comes up after those 19 years of meditation, it comes up one thought and he believes in that and it's done.
Yes, but well, at that time I was very surprised, but now I see, and because of that I'm also not so sure about myself. Did I really see it? Or was the thought already in my mind and it was influencing my perception of what is happening in my mind? I don't know.
What's the difference? What's the difference? If you imagine it to be the case, it is the case in exactly the same way, isn't it? What's the difference?
Well, maybe he would say that he is sitting in meditation and he sees with
Yes.
his
Oh,
own
yeah, yeah. No,
eyes how
yeah,
but I am making the decision. So
yeah.
I
But for
don't
you,
know.
when you say doubt comes along and says, "Did I really see this?" What I'm saying to you is that doubt is just a thought. The seeing of it, if you remember back to that seeing, it was much more than just a thought. There was a thought, but there was also a knowing that it was right at the time. And afterwards, doubt thoughts come along that say, did I really see it?
Because beliefs influence perception.
Yes, absolutely. They create perception. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, big time. Yeah. So what would happen to you? So play out this fantasy. What would happen to you if absolutely nothing was to change except the fact that you realized that you are awake? Everything else continued. Everything happens exactly the same as it's been happening. Everything is no different whatsoever, except that one thing that you realize that you are awake. What's the response that comes up to that fantasy?
If I would really know for myself that I am awake, yes, right now.
So there's nothing new.
Just with little, you're lying.
Yeah, good one. Yeah,
You are lying.
but well, that's not what I'm
It's
asking.
just but it's just you can't take the false spot.
But we're allowed to in a fantasy.
Hmm?
And so because a fantasy is what it is, we're just imagining that that's the case, that you suddenly realize that you are awake and that what you've been experiencing is going to be the same. except for that one difference, that you now recognize that you are awake. And all of your daily experiences, all of the things that you go through now, will continue exactly as they are, unless that idea that you are awake changes them. So could it be that you is it possible in this fantasy, let's keep it at a fantasy level, that you are awake, but you don't know that you're awake, and then in your fantasy that you realize that you are awake and that this is it, exactly what you've been experiencing now. The need for your medications and everything exactly the same. Nothing changes, except that all of a sudden you realize that you are awake. That is going to change things, isn't it? That recognition that you are awake will change your view of some things.
No, then I think the reaction that comes is, but then it's just a name.
Well, it is just a name. Yeah, that's a pretty awake thing to say, to realise that. It is just a name. It doesn't, there's no actual anything. There's no actual being awake. It's only a name that
So
works for people who are not awake. It doesn't work for people who are awake.
so it doesn't change anything.
So whether you are or whether you're not, doesn't change anything.
If you give me a name, it
Yeah,
doesn't change anything.
no. It's just the
Well,
label. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. You
what
can
changes?
start calling me, I don't know, Anna, whatever.
Fred. Yeah.
It doesn't change anything.
But what changes is that the belief that you're not awake.
Well, that I have no idea. How could it change?
I think there's some juice in the idea of becoming soulless. That may well be something that you don't want to provoke too much, maybe. But when you said soulless is not emotionless, I'd like to explore that a little bit more. Is it a morality issue, soulless? No. Tell us what's your idea of soulless?
Oh. Because it is, in a way, it's a meta level.
No love, you mean?
What?
Did you say, when you say a meta level, you're saying no love, using meta in that
No,
way? No?
no. Like metaphysics.
Oh, right, yeah. They're one T, not two. Yeah,
This
yeah,
meta.
yes.
Uh, mm, I don't know. It's just this existential stuff.
right, let's try from slightly different angle. You're saying that there will be the absence of something, soulless. So no soul. Right? So that absence is that about an absence of what, responsiveness? An absence of ability to experience something? What's the
Yeah,
absence?
the deeper layer of existence.
Oh,
Existence slash experience slash consciousness. Yes, it's the same thing.
okay. Now I'm suddenly confused because I thought we were moving towards that, not away from it. And you're suggesting that if
But
you wake up, you'll be moving towards that absence.
no. It was at first we were talking with Marius about my attachment to this existential stuff, my attachment to anxiety about this, but there is rather something but nothing. I don't know if it goes away with awakening. Maybe it doesn't. Who
Mm.
said it has to go away? But maybe it does. Maybe it's the attachment to this thought that keeps me away from awakening.
So that's certainly
That
something.
was well something that Marius proposed.
So after awakening, I have to smile every time I say that, something like that. After awakening, attachments will appear. For a while, they'll appear quite regularly. Attachments that we didn't know we had. When I'm using attachments as in identification, identification is how we would describe it, but the mechanism is attachment. So identification is always about attachment, the connection to. And after awakening, my experience has been a fairly, I was going to say consistent flow, but it's not really consistent. But there's been a flow of recognitions of attachments, of identifications that, and as recently as last week, I had another experience where I realised I'm identified still. But the thing with after awakening rather than before awakening is that after awakening there's a curiosity to explore that and see where it sits, what's going on with it. Whereas before awakening there seems to be a need to fix it, to get rid of it. So it seems seen as an indication that something is wrong before awakening, but after awakening it's almost the opposite. It's that, wow, here's another opportunity to clean out a bit more. But the point I'm making is that attachments will still occur after awakening. They're recognized to be in existence after awakening. But usually the difference between being awake and not is that when one is awake, they're welcomed as an opportunity. Whereas when they're When one is not awake, they're seen as a job to do.
I would also add, Vince, and you can tell me if you disagree here, but there is a different perception that I find makes it easier to identify attachments, to catch it in the act, or to, I experience that a lot quicker, the movement of having an attachment and seeing it happen rather than before awakening where that curiosity that you're talking about wasn't there, so it wasn't,
Mm.
the perception was different.
Yeah, that sounds right. I get that. That's definitely the case these days. It's seen way sooner than it used to be, uh, because it's not it's not an enemy anymore. It's
Yeah.
just something that's there. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yes, of course.
Hello, Bianca. I'm sorry,
Hi.
my little window is black. It's just my internet is useless. I really think all that you've said is amazing. You've got an amazing, amazing mind. You're very intelligent, and you're using your mind to beat yourself up. It's like all the words, the awakening, that word awakening, no one knows what it means. We don't know why we're here in a way. We're here because there's something innate in us that brings us here, that's unexplainable, that's beyond our wonderful intelligence. And I think that's why you're here. You're well aware of the gap between what the world offers and what, in a way, you know is possible. I think with language, you can language your way into a paper bag and stay there. And in a way, language has to be put aside. And if I could invite you to feel your way with your heart or your body, just to feel your way, feel it. Maybe that will be a more
Well,
open way.
I
Mhm.
uh, because um, you were talking about attachments as something to get rid of.
No, I wouldn't worry about getting rid of anything. Just leave it.
No. And for me, this attachment to existential stuff,
Yeah,
it's not something that I want to get rid of.
right. I would agree. It's very important. So it's not about getting rid of anything. Not at all. Not changing a thing. Just being with everything as it is. Right here, right now. And feel it in your body. Not with any idea of language. There's nothing to do. I made you smile.
Yes, because that is absolutely true. There is nothing to do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I am not awakened. I just
Well,
know
I wouldn't
this.
worry about it.
And
Just
there is nothing wrong with it.
no,
at
nothing at
all.
all. Nothing at all. There's nothing wrong with it. The idea of not saying that you're not awake. I mean, I don't even know what that means. It's like saying that I'm not spaghetti. Well, I'm not that. But, it's just saying something. I think the word awaken, that's, our mission is to be awakened. I think we already are, but our minds say something else. I really think that you are already awakened, but your mind is saying something else. It wants proof or something. It wants something. And that's the inquiry, is what is it that it's wanting? What does your mind actually want? What is this mystery? So you could find it and then you could sell it, bottle it.
Yeah, write a book.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like it doesn't matter if no one believes me. I'm not awakened. I just know.
Okay.
Mm.
Me neither. Thank you.
Bianca, this is Irene. Hi. I also uh, would say you are awake, and that you're acknowledging that awakeness means losing something or facing some kind of fear. And that's what's stopping you from acknowledging your awakeness, is that somehow by acknowledging it, it's tied up with you're going to lose something or face some sort of fear that you don't want to face. Something along those lines. Do either of those resonate?
Oh, hmm. It's rather like I think it is about a feeling. Like it's like I feel it it would have it would have come from the body. And it doesn't. And that is why I say I'm not like.
So am I understanding you correctly that there needs to be something in the body that alerts you to the awakeness?
Yes, like a body, yes.
A body, yes. Ah. I don't know that I ever got a body yes. That's interesting. My sense here is that somehow the non-acknowledgement of the awakeness is a defense mechanism. It's like it's a defensiveness, like it should be showing up in the body, but it's not showing up in the body. And so therefore, it seems like there's some sort of a defense mechanism going on, that you're acknowledging your awakeness protects something. That's my sense. Something's being protected. If something were being protected, what do you think it might be?
Okay, Vince method, first word that came, humility.
Humility would be being protected. Did I understand that correctly? That humility is what would be protected?
Yes.
Why not? Can you say more about that? You would lose your humility if you acknowledged.
I'm afraid I could get very full of myself.
Oh, I hear you.
I am a know-it-all.
Oh.
Oh, you could become an arrogant bastard like me or Marius.
Oh. Oh, wow.
I'm arrogant enough as I am.
Oh, so you would be kind of full of yourself, huh? That would be the fear?
Yes.
It's so interesting because while I'm certain that that can be a temporary phase, and I think I probably have been there, ultimately it you're actually absent of the self, not full of the self. So it's actually the opposite. Not to say that you can't fall into a trap of being arrogant and believing that you're doing something, blah, 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 all of that. But ultimately, the self structure that goes, what goes with it is self-referential thought and all of that. It goes with the going of the self construct. So ultimately, there's an absence of that because there's no self there to be humble or arrogant. There's just this.
Others will continue to see you the way they've always seen you.
And I think, as you've said, it doesn't matter what other people think. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. What if you went through by acknowledging your awakeness? Let's imagine that you go through a phase of becoming arrogant and full of yourself, and people think you're arrogant and full of yourself. And it's a phase that you go through. It's a passage. It's a whatever, pitfall, whatever you want to call it, a misidentification or whatever. And then you come out of that and you look back and you recognize, oh, I was full of myself. And now I see that there's no one to be full of anything. Would that be scary?
I could cause suffering for others. That would be scary because of my arrogance.
Hmm. The thought that arises, you can cause suffering to others by not acknowledging your awakeness too. I don't
How?
know. It seems funny to me. It just what arises. It just seems funny. Like, you know, if if someone experienced suffering because of because of arrogance, how do you know that that isn't exactly how that needs to show up? You're not intentionally looking to cause suffering. And if in the arising of arrogance, it did cause suffering, what if that was somehow of benefit to someone? It doesn't have to be detrimental. It actually can be of benefit. How do you know it's not or wouldn't be? Can you know that?
No, but it would be painful for me.
So not acknowledging your awakeness ultimately is about keeping yourself safe from pain. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, but also there was one thing that you've said that eventually, ultimately, the structure of self dissolves completely. And maybe this is what I would call awakening.
Again,
And I'm not there.
We're talking terminology, but I think that for me was what I would call embodiment. It's when the awakening is embodied, is when the self structure is. I call awakening the end of seeking. When seeking ends and you're no longer seeking, that's what I call awakening. All of these terms are just terms, but we try to, communicate and understand, but they're just words. But for me, in my understanding, awakening would be the end of seeking, and embodiment would be the dissolution of the self-construct, and with it, the dissolution of relative thought and self-referential thought. That's gone with the disappearance of the self. And that's really freedom. That's what I experience. That's liberation. There's no more self-referential. There's no more self-referential thought. No one to think about, what if I cause suffering? It just doesn't come up.
Yes, that's it.
So if I imagine that's something we all have in common. I've experienced many times in my life somebody suffering and they point the finger at me and what I've done or what I've said as the reason for their suffering. And it was unintentional on my part. I just put my foot in my mouth. I just opened my mouth and said something that I shouldn't have said, or rather that was indelicate, or I don't know how it could be described. I'm not thinking of any specific incident, but many, many times people have said, you should not have done that because, and I'm kind of a bit gobsmacked because I didn't do anything intentionally. I was just me. And yet here's this other person suffering, saying that what I did caused that suffering. And I think about it and I think, hang on, I do get from one perspective how what they're saying is accurate, but from another perspective, it's obvious that their response to what I've said is what's causing them to suffer, not what I did, but the way they responded to it is the suffering that they're experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
So how am I responsible for, how did I even know that that's how they were going to take it? Because they weren't, I wasn't that familiar with them to know that that's how they would take it. So if I go out there, and I say very loudly, Donald Trump's an idiot, and there's a Trump supporter, he's immediately going to get defensive and he's going to experience some kind of suffering and he's going to want to change my view or something like that. But it's nothing to do with me. I've just been the trigger for his suffering. Now, I can imagine that you can see that in your life as well, that people have suffered and they say it's because of you when it's got nothing to do with you. It's not about what you did or said. It's about the way they took it. And that depends on their conditioning, their whole lifetime of looking at things from that perspective. How are you to know about that? Especially if they're a stranger.
Yeah, it's more about
Intentional stuff, I think you're saying, eh?
just, yeah, and not being skillful.
Right. Okay, so that crosses over a little bit from intention, Yes, we intend to do right, but we're not very good at it, so it turns out wrong. Yeah.
But this
But
also kind
here's,
of takes
go
us
ahead.
back. Sorry, Irene. I'm just
No,
going
go
to
ahead.
point out this kind of also takes us back to a belief in control again, because earlier you kind of said you saw that there is no control, but yet you're trying to control whether somebody is suffering or not.
I just prefer to be skillful and not unskillful.
Is that something that you can control?
No, but it still pains me when I'm unskillful.
So you're judging yourself for something you have no control over.
That's a big one for you, I think, given that I remember you having certain feelings about your father's lack of skill in certain areas.
Yeah, it can be my father, whoever. Watching something done unskillfully is painful.
Mm.
Are you willing to, let me ask you a question. When you're learning to ride a bicycle and you fall off the bike, that's unskillful, right? You can scrape your knee, you can hurt yourself. It's unskillful, yeah? But how do you get skillful at riding a bike? Through being unskillful. You don't get to skillful by jumping into skillful. You get to skillful by being with unskillful and being with the pain of being unskillful. And that leads to skillfulness. But it sounds like you want to be skillful without going through a process of developing skill. Because the fear of the pain is too great.
That is a common theme in my life.
I hear you. I hear you.
I've learned to ride the bike very cautiously, very carefully. It was a slow process.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing wrong with a slow process. But you
No
recognize
falling off the bike included.
Oh, no falling off is allowed, huh?
No, didn't happen.
Not permitted. Yeah.
So you were skillful at getting skillful with the bike riding.
Yes, it is possible.
Maybe that's what's happening here. We're getting skillful very slowly. Mm.
You know what Vince was saying about, you know, from a relative self reflective mind, it's easy to point and say, oh, you caused this suffering in me. But in the absence of the self construct, there's no place to point. It takes the whole universe coming together for anything to happen. There's no place where you can point the finger and say that was the cause of something. So I don't understand how you can think that you're the cause. That's a misinterpretation. That's a confusion in consciousness, that you think that you could be the cause of someone's suffering.
Well, she didn't actually say that. She said she was worried that that might be the case.
Oh, but is it true that you could be the cause of someone's suffering? Is that true?
Mm. Mm. Well, maybe more precise would be one of the conditions.
Can you say more about that?
Well, because it did happen that my arrogance uh, would lead to someone being hurt, crying. I was not the sole cause of it. But I was a condition.
Is there a specific incident that you're thinking of?
Yes.
Can you share what that incident was?
I don't want to talk about a third person, especially in this case.
Okay. So can you share when you say arrogance, can you share the words you used that you call arrogance?
Well, I started psychoanalyzing her.
Okay. That's always annoying, isn't it? When we're psychoanalyzed. Yeah, it's annoying, right? Nobody wants to be psychoanalyzed, right? So you recognized you were psychoanalyzing.
Yes, I was psychoanalyzing. Well, I recognized it afterwards.
But you recognized it.
In the situation, I felt I was so in the right and defending the right cause, and
Yes. And so is it possible when you notice that you acknowledge it and make amends with her and say, I'm sorry, I felt so right, and now I see that it was just arrogance. It was just my thinking I was right. I'm so sorry that I caused you pain. It wasn't my intention.
Yeah.
Is it okay that you can say, I made a mistake? It wasn't.
I did, and in the process of apologizing, I again went into this mode of I know it all and patronizing and what it was so awful. Just like I can't get out of this mode.
You know what? You could make it just say, you know what? I'm here. There I go again. Oh my God. There I go again. Can you believe it? I want to get out of this and I just keep falling into it. What a.
Yeah.
It's like, because
yeah, I did the best I could, and somehow
exactly
we resolved it. Yeah, she won't run away at my side. That's that's the best I could do. Okay.
Yes, it was the best you could do. It was the best you could do. And you do it until you don't do it. You're going to do that until you don't do it, but it has nothing to do with awakeness. You can be awake and do that, and you can be unawake and do that. It's just what you're doing. It's just thinking you know more than you do. One of the things that happens here is I just keep coming back to there's a word in the Native American language. It's tikwaota. It means I don't know shit. Tikwaota. I keep coming back. I don't know shit. I don't know anything. And arrogance comes up, and man, I try and clean it up, and I fall back into arrogance, and I clean it up, and we resolve it, and it's a slow process until arrogance just isn't an issue anymore. It just doesn't show up.
So you
But
saw that when it was happening, Bianca. At what point did the thought turn up for you that, oh, I'm being arrogant, I'm being a know-it-all? At what point did that thought? Was it while it was happening, or afterwards, the next day?
Afterwards, I don't remember. It was quite a time ago.
Hmm. But the second time, when you
Hey,
were
a few
apologizing to
days.
her and it happened, you saw it happening as it was happening, eh?
Oh, because she reacted strongly
Yes.
to it.
Yeah. And the person you were when you were apologizing was anything but arrogant, eh? That person was the opposite of arrogance. Very humble. You were when you were apologizing for being arrogant. You were anything but arrogant, eh? Was that the case?
Oh, we don't know.
Hmm.
It
I feel like
feels
there was still arrogance. You know, even when you're apologizing, there still can be, I'm so right, I'm doing the apologizing.
So it would be after that you saw there was still arrogance in that.
It's just,
But what I'm saying is, when you saw the arrogance, when you saw that there was arrogance, you weren't being arrogant then. And which one of those was the real Bianca? The one that was or the one that wasn't? Or is that a totally stupid question? Of course it is, because there's no real Bianca, one or the other. But I'm saying that you exhibited both behaviors. You were arrogant and then you were very, very unarrogant at some point, even though it was afterwards maybe. But that's all right. But I'm saying you can't say one is real Bianca and the other one is not real Bianca. You can say they're both real Bianca, or you can say the whole idea of real Bianca or unreal Bianca is stupid. That's probably more accurate. But nevertheless, to say I am arrogant is only talking about one aspect of you that's there for a short time. And the opposite was equally true. And I would say probably nowhere, and I could be wrong about this, but I would imagine that nowhere was there an intention to hurt that person. If
mhm.
anything, your arrogance might have come from a desire to help that person. Very unskillful, but still no intention, no evil person lives in there.
Are there judgmental thoughts that come up, or did they come up around that process? Judgmental of yourself, I mean. It seems like that because it seems like you feel bad for it, for that happening.
It's rather embarrassment.
I'm getting a sense, Bianca, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it almost felt shameful.
Yeah. It's like I don't really know how to behave in a humble way. Like when I try, it's at the it's like bad play.
And
That
it's easy to
sounds a
see
bit
where that came from.
judgmental.
Sorry.
I was going to
Who's
just say that sounds a bit judgmental.
Yeah, it's because when I noticed being arrogant, I said, okay, no more such behavior. The only other thing that I could do was like to be a giggling idiot. You
Do
know,
you
it's
see
like,
that?
sorry.
But do you see that your behavior is your programming, is your conditioning, and then
Yes, yes,
there are thoughts that says that that conditioning is wrong. You judge, you identify with your conditioning, and you judge yourself for it. You believe those thoughts that say that that is wrong and that that is you.
but well, it happened as it happened,
Exactly.
and it doesn't matter if it was I or someone else. It still would be unskillful behavior and somewhat unpleasant to watch.
But do you see that it has to be some thought there saying that it shouldn't be like that. That there's a judgment of what happened that you believe in.
Yes.
That is how I see it, what is creating the suffering around that particular situation is that you don't accept what was in that moment and you blame yourself for it. Something you have
I think
zero
blame
control
is
over.
too strong word.
What would be the right word?
It's sad.
Sadness is one thing, but do you hold on to that sadness?
I keep it as a precaution. Remember, Bianca, to be cautious because it can happen again.
Bianca, I just want to acknowledge your humility in recognizing that it could happen again, and your intention clearly is not to cause suffering. It is so evident in your sharing. And I just want to acknowledge that I clearly see that.
Thank you.
It seems to me that there's something about being unskillful that you talk like that's a choice, or that's a possibility to be or not be. But it isn't, surely it isn't a choice, eh? If you're unskillful, you're unskillful. If you're skillful, you're skillful. That's it. Full stop. And yet I remember you talking about, please correct me if I'm wrong with the words, but that I remember you mentioning what I perceived as shame about your father's lack of skill with being socially adept. And again, it's like there's an implication there that it could be different, when in fact it couldn't be, could it? It is the way it is. So is the hinge for this thing a belief that doesn't make any sense, that it could be different when it happens, when it has happened? It's always in the past, isn't it?
It couldn't be different, but it is still sad.
Yeah. So recognizing that sadness and grief are two different things. So sadness is just a physical expression of something, whereas grief is the sadness with stories that it could be different. So there is no stories for you that it could be different. It's just a statement of fact. Sad. Yeah? Yeah. Right. So if it occurs to me, sadness is a little bit like doubts. It's never going to be cured. It can't be fixed. It's just what it is, and the only thing to do is get bored with it and not pay it any attention anymore.
And in order to be sad about something, there needs to be a thought about it. So there is
Yeah.
an apparent attachment to that thought.
Mm.
That's what I was
Yeah.
kind of alluding to earlier, um, with with attachments to that existential stuff that you were talking about, which the point works for everything else. Uh, any other attachment to thought is that it 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 fixates you into a thought movement. Mm, and as long as that attachment lives, you kind of never get peace. You need to drop it. And if it's dropped, there is no sadness. But it seems to be like I I remember I used to believe that I had to remember, like I had to judge myself in order to remember things that I should learn not to do again. It was kind of like I was whipping myself with these judgments because I believed that this would condition me faster not to do that same behavior again. And I kind of get the same sense here that there is a belief that holding on to that attachment, that thought, that you kind of um, you think you're protecting, like you're making sure that that will never happen again by holding on to that thought, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like, well, I know what you said. It's sadness is gentle. It's not a whip.
Mm.
So in a way, the sadness is this gentle protection against the whipping.
Mm.
What Marius is suggesting is that it's a it's a velvet covered whip. It is still the whip that works, but it's a gentle whip.
Well, I like it.
There's lots to explore about with what we've spoken about. And I found it interesting. At one point, I had the thought that a lot of what you see as negative about being awake, Bianca, is the opposite of my experience. You know, you're seeing things, you're imagining things that are quite the opposite of what I actually experience about being awake.
You mean arrogance?
That amongst them, yes. Yeah.
Mm, it's just because I know myself.
Mm. Do you? That's the whole
It's
point.
not about everyone that's.
Mm. Of course.
But I also heard it happens.
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
some people go through the arrogant phase, and I'm very prone to that.
Yeah, me too. I mean, the way I talk sounds a lot like I'm a know-it-all often, I'm sure. But that's the way I am, so that's the way I am. It doesn't mean that I do know it all. It just sounds like I know it all because of the way I talk. So maybe that you've got your own version of that. So those people who are going to get offended, they're going to get offended anyway. They're going to get offended by much less strident way of talking than what we use. But at the same time, if they do get offended, I would feel sad that they get offended. But I can't control that. I can't control whether they get offended, and I can't control whether I feel sad about that they got offended.
Also, there's no possible way for you to actually know that you would become arrogant. So it's just a fantasy that you're believing in, even though you might believe there is a bigger chance of that happening. It's just a thought.
Yep. And your history,
Well,
it's your
so
history. It's not. Yeah.
all of it is an assumption. Yeah, it's just the first word that came up was humility, but
Mm,
is it really about it? Maybe it's something else.
yeah. Who knows? Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you, Bianca. And everybody, I need to go now. I'm getting dirty looks from my family.
Thanks, Lynda. Yeah.
Thank you so
Bye,
much.
Lynda.
Thank you.
I think it's
You.
time I went as well. It's my turn to cook tea. So,
Thank you, everyone.
thank you.
Thank you, Bianca. Thanks, everyone.